Hello and welcome back to One World. In just a moment, I'll be speaking with journalist and activist HOPEWELL to discuss what's changed a year after the Zimbabwean Lives Matter movement. But first, let's catch up on the news. The UN Special Envoy to Afghanistan says the war there has, quote, entered a new, deadlier and more destructive phase. It comes as the city of Zaranj, near Afghanistan's border with Iran, becomes the first provincial capital to fall to the Taliban, and as militants continue to make sweeping advances throughout the country. The Taliban are claiming responsibility for the assassination of the Afghan government's top media and information officer. The US and EU diplomats are condemning the attack, saying they're shocked and appalled. The Islamist group is trying to weaken President Ashraf Ghani's administration. Two Belarusian coaches have been removed from the Olympics after they allegedly tried to send a sprinter back home against her will. The International Olympic Committee says it revoked their accreditation as an interim measure and will continue to investigate. Both coaches have left the Olympic Village, but they can still appeal that decision. Well, it's been 1 year since protesters in Zimbabwe launched an online movement against human rights abuses. It was dubbed Zimbabwean Lives Matter, and it called on people to stage demonstrations on social media to challenge corruption. It was heavily influenced by the Black Lives Matter protests here in the US, which demanded social justice reform after the murder of George Floyd at the hands of police. And it followed the mass arrest of Zimbabwean activists last summer who attempted to hold protests against government corruption and economic hardship, but they were thwarted by security forces. President Emmerson Mnangagwa said the demonstration amounted to an insurrection by the opposition. And 1 year later, the government is still making it hard for people to voice their anger on the streets. Well, time now for the exchange. And today we're speaking to a journalist who's been arrested multiple times after investigating corruption allegations. With me now from Harare is HOPEWELL Chinono. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So 1 year on since the Zimbabwean Lives Matter movement began, inspired by the Black Lives Matter movement here in the US, talk to us about what's been achieved.
What has been achieved is we've been able to educate citizens to understand that their problems are stemming from the looting of public funds and the plunder of the country's natural resources. We've been able to articulate to citizens that without these two terrible things that are happening in Zimbabwe, it would be difficult for the economy to take off. The government has been using an excuse of sanctions, saying that the American sanctions are the reason. And for some time, people actually believed it until we started educating people and putting the evidence before the citizens to see that indeed public funds are being looted and the nation's natural resources are being plundered.
And under so-called COVID pandemic measures, the president has been effectively able to shut down protests. Thus, people have taken to online to protest. What impact has that had?
I think the impact that it has had is that of awareness. The problem is that each time Zimbabweans try to petition their government, something that is underpinned by the constitution, ZANU-PF ruling party and the president, the government, they use jackboot tactics. They arrest people, they build trumped up charges. I was arrested for essentially exposing corruption and for asking for the government to stop corruption and the looting of public funds. They arrested me. They said that I was inciting citizens to be violent against the government, and which is not true. So the COVID regulations have been used to thwart what is otherwise allowed by the constitution in terms of petitioning the government and letting the government of the day know that the citizens are unhappy.
And you were arrested not once, but 3 times within 6 months, right?
That is correct. I was arrested the first time on the 20th of July. After I exposed corruption. I was arrested just a week after the ruling party had held a press conference where their spokesperson said that I should stop what I was doing, alleging that the president's children were involved in a $60 million US COVID looting scandal. And then I was arrested again on the 3rd of November in 2020, after I had exposed that the president's niece, who had been caught at the international airport trying to smuggle 6 kilograms of gold, was going to get bail unopposed. And then I was arrested again on the 8th of January. This time they arrested me for something that I didn't even do. They lied that I tweeted about something to do with the police. They went on to use a law that does not exist in our constitution, and I spent 20 days in prison. All in all, inside 6 months, I spent 85 days in prison for something that I didn't do.
Wow. I mean, I'm just wondering whether you fear for your safety, because you are one of the president's most prominent critics.
I do indeed fear for my safety, but there's nothing that you can do. I mean, I'm Zimbabwean. I can't run away from my own country. Even if I wanted to leave, I can't leave because they've taken away my passport. I mean, I've just been invited to be a keynote speaker at the South African Editors Forum in South Africa in Johannesburg next week. I've had to go to court. The state is refusing to allow the courts to give me my passport. So we're living under very difficult conditions. I mean, everything is terrible from the economy. There's poverty. There's 50% poverty in Zimbabwe at the moment. That's 8 million people who are living in abject poverty, extreme poverty. And it's worse than what it was in 2008 at the height of the crisis when Robert Mugabe was in power.
They need people like you to expose what is going on. I'm wondering, though, what structural reforms might come from the online activism that we're seeing. How does that translate into real reform?
I think the problem that we have at the moment is that the opposition has been decimated. The president has decimated the opposition. He has created a situation where the real opposition has had most of their MPs removed from parliament, and he has created his own fake opposition, which is now in parliament, and it endorses what he wants. He doesn't have a two-thirds majority to change the constitution, but he's changing the constitution almost every other day if he wants, because he has got that fake opposition. So it's difficult to get any reforms through parliament, and it's difficult for citizens to protest, which is allowed by the constitution, because each time they try to protest, they are arrested and they're thrown into prison.
He came to power promising political and economic reform, and therefore there was some major investment from overseas. What hope is there now going forward for Zimbabwe? Where do you think things can go in the months ahead?
Economically, things are getting worse. There's no investment that is coming into the country. And one of the reasons why there's no investment coming into the country is that we have a corrupt central bank, we have a corrupt Minister of Finance, and we have a corrupt government. For instance, they have got a foreign exchange rate which is fixed. They call it the auction rate, at 85 Zimbabwean dollars to $1 US. And yet on the streets, in the supermarkets, the real rate is at 145 to 150 to the US dollar. So it's difficult for someone to bring their money, and they are told that you're going to get your money at 85, and yet the real value of goods in the streets and in supermarkets is at 145. It is difficult to come to a country where courts are manipulated. Every time I go to court, I know that each time I go to the magistrate's court, I don't get bail. The magistrate's court will actually tell you that the law that has been used to arrest you is legitimate when it doesn't exist under the constitution of Zimbabwe. So investors look at all those things and they wonder that if we can be treated like this as citizens, what more them who are foreigners?
Hopewell Chinono, we wish you all the best as you continue to speak out against corruption. Thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you very much.